The Hart Senate office building had never seen anything like this. Every seat in hearing room 200 was occupied, the air thick with anticipation. Standing room stretched to the back walls, a sea of suits, press badges, and curious onlookers. The press gallery overflowed with correspondents from CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, BBC, and networks spanning the globe, their cameras trained on the center of the room. Regular programming had been interrupted for live coverage, a rarity for a hearing titled Ethics and Transparency in Modern Government. The bureaucratic name suggested empty seats and C-SPAN obscurity, but whispers had been circulating through Washington for weeks. Something monumental was coming. Thung-E-C John Kennedy, the sharp-witted Republican from Louisiana, had requested to testify. He had documents. He had evidence. He had something that would shake the foundations of American politics. The room buzzed with tension as the clock ticked closer to the start. At 3:42 p.m., Nancy Pelosi entered with the poise of a political titan. Her Chanel suit was impeccably tailored, her Mikimoto pearls gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her smile was practiced predatory, the kind that had crushed opponents for 4 decades. She moved with the confidence of someone who owned every room she entered, every negotiation, every political battle. Pelosi had come to assert her dominance, to remind Washington who held true power. She was here to dismantle John Kennedy, the folksy senator who dared to challenge her legacy. She believed she would leave this room unscathed, her dynasty intact. She was wrong. At the witness table sat John Kennedy, his demeanor calm, almost understated. His suit was modest, a far cry from Pelosi's designer elegance, but his presence carried weight. The senior senator from Louisiana, known for his razor-sharp wit and Southern charm, was no stranger to tough fights. His eyes, steady and piercing, scanned the room briefly, before settling on the manila folder before him. That folder held the truth, decades of meticulously gathered evidence, bank records, trading documents, audio recordings, a catalog of corruption that would unravel a political empire. Kennedy wasn't here for theatrics or personal gain. He was here to honor a principle that public service should never be a path to personal enrichment. The contrast between the two figures was stark. Pelosi, the embodiment of Washington's elite, her wealth and influence built over decades of political maneuvering. Kennedy, the son of Louisiana, whose plain-spoken style masked a brilliant legal mind and an unshakable commitment to accountability. Wealth versus integrity. Power versus principle. The past versus the future of American leadership. The cameras captured it all, zooming in on Pelosi's calculated smile and Kennedy's quiet resolve. The room held its breath, sensing the seismic shift about to unfold. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a reckoning. At exactly 3:47 p.m., Chairman Reynolds called the hearing to order, his gavel striking with a thud that silenced the murmurs. The silence was heavy, the kind that precedes earthquakes or battles, the kind that signals history is about to change. Pelosi rose from her chair, her posture regal, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to unchallenged power. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." She began, her tone smooth, but edged with condescension. "I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the real challenges facing American governance. Ethics and transparency are critical, but they require experience, wisdom, and an understanding of the complexities of leadership." She turned toward Kennedy, her smile tightening, a predator sizing up prey. "Senator Kennedy," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "I'm curious what qualifies you to lecture us on ethics." A folksy senator from Louisiana, known more for colorful quotes than substantive policy. "Tell us, what experience do you have navigating the intricate realities of congressional leadership?" Murmurs rippled through the audience. A few chuckles came from the Democratic side. Pelosi's staff seated behind her exchanged smirks, confident their boss was about to deliver another masterclass in political destruction. This was the Nancy Pelosi they knew, sharp-cutting, politically lethal. Pelosi warmed to her attack, her voice rising with theatrical flair. Perhaps if you spent less time crafting sound bites for cable news and more time understanding how government actually works, you'd grasp the difficult choices we face. The compromises, the competing interests, the sacrifices required to keep this nation strong. The word sacrifices landed like a challenge, and the Democratic side erupted in laughter. Progressive activists in the gallery nodded approvingly. Pelosi was in her element, dismantling an opponent with surgical precision. She turned to acknowledge her supporters, basking in their applause. She thought she had Kennedy cornered, a junior player, outmatched by her decades of dominance. She was playing with fire. Kennedy sat quietly, his expression unchanged, his hands resting lightly on the folder. He didn't flinch at the laughter or the condescension. He'd faced tougher opponents than Pelosi, not in Washington's marble halls, but in the courtrooms and communities of Louisiana, where he'd spent decades fighting for fairness and accountability. He knew corruption when he saw it, not the abstract kind debated on talk shows, but the real kind that hurt people, that robbed families of opportunities, that undermined trust in the system. Pelosi's attack was meant to humiliate, but it only sharpened his resolve. You see, Pelosi continued, sensing weakness in Kennedy's silence. Some of us have been serving this country since before you found your way to the Senate. We know what it takes to make the hard choices to deliver results for the American people. Perhaps, instead of grandstanding about ethics, you could learn from those of us who've actually made a difference. The applause from her allies was immediate, sustained a wave of approval that filled the room. Pelosi leaned back, confident she'd landed her punches. She had no idea she'd just ignited a fuse. For 47 seconds, John Kennedy said nothing. The silence stretched heavy and uncomfortable. The cameras zoomed in, searching for a reaction, for any sign of weakness. But Kennedy wasn't rattled. His face remained calm, his eyes steady, the faintest hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This wasn't the silence of a politician scrambling for a soundbite. This was the silence of a man who'd spent years preparing for this moment, who knew the weight of the truth he was about to unleash. Pelosi shifted in her seat, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Something was wrong. Politicians didn't sit silent under attack unless they had something devastating planned. Kennedy's mind flashed briefly to a memory not of Washington, but of Louisiana. A small business owner in Baton Rouge, struggling to keep his company afloat, while politically connected firms secured government contracts. A single mother in New Orleans, working 2 jobs to afford rent, while politicians grew rich off insider deals. Kennedy had seen the cost of corruption up close, not in abstract policy debates, but in the lives of the people he served. He'd made a promise to those people: when he saw wrong, he'd call it out no matter who stood in the way. That promise had brought him here, to this room, to this moment. When Kennedy finally spoke, his voice was steady, his southern drawl carrying a quiet authority that commanded the room. "Madam Speaker, thank you for your perspective on sacrifice and service," he said, his tone polite, but edged with steel. "I'd like to offer a different perspective, one the American people deserve to hear." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Something in his voice, his posture, signaled that this was no ordinary response. The cameras zoomed in on the manila folder as Kennedy's fingers rested on its edge. Pelosi's smile flickered the first crack in her political armor. Mr. Chairman Kennedy continued, his eyes locking briefly with the committee head, Before sweeping the room with your permission, I'd like to present evidence about what real corruption looks like. About what happens when public service becomes a private profit scheme. About what it means to betray the trust of the American people. The room held its breath. Every camera focused on the two figures at the center of the storm. Pelosi, the Titan of Washington, and Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, holding a folder that could end her career. The silence was suffocating, the kind that precedes history-changing moments. Kennedy opened the folder with deliberate precision, pulling out the first document, a single sheet of paper that would unravel decades of deception. "Let's start with something simple," he said, his voice calm but unrelenting. "A stock trade, December, a few years back. Your husband, Madam Speaker, purchased between $1 and $5 million in NVIDIA stock. A smart move considering what happened next." He held up the document, letting the cameras catch the numbers. "A month later, you championed the CHIPS Act in classified committee sessions, armed with intelligence about Chinese semiconductor threats, intelligence not available to the public." The implications landed like a thunderclap. The room, already quiet, grew stiller. Pelosi's hand froze mid-reach for her water glass. Her staff exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't political theater. This was a surgical strike delivered with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor. Kennedy's voice remained steady, his southern cadence making the accusations sound almost conversational, yet all the more devastating. The CHIPS Act passed, pouring $52 billion of taxpayer money into the semiconductor industry. NVIDIA's stock soared 40% in the months that followed. Your family's profit from that single trade, approximately $4 million. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. $4 million, Madam Speaker, from one trade timed perfectly with classified information. Information you had access to as a member of Congress. Information ordinary Americans didn't have. The Democratic side of the room was silent. Now, the earlier laughter replaced by unease. The press gallery buzzed with whispers as reporters typed furiously, sensing a story that would dominate headlines for weeks. Kennedy pulled out another document, his movements methodical, unhurried. "But that's just one trade," he said, his eyes locking onto Pelosi's. "Let's talk about another. Visa stock sold by your husband just months before a Department of Justice lawsuit against the company. Perfect timing again. Losses avoided, roughly $27,000. The odds of that being a coincidence, less than 1 in 10,000, according to statistical analysis." He held up a chart, the numbers clear for all to see. "This isn't luck, Madam Speaker. This is a pattern." Pelosi tried to interrupt, her voice sharp but unsteady. "Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous speculation." Kennedy cut her off, his tone polite but firm. "I have the floor, Madam Speaker, and the American people deserve to hear the truth." The rebuke was so calm, so professional, it landed harder than any shout. Nancy Pelosi. The woman who had silenced presidents was silenced herself. The room felt it. The balance of power had shifted. Kennedy leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "This folder contains evidence of a system, Madam Speaker. A system where classified briefings became investment tips, where public office became a private trading desk, where the American people's trust was sold for personal profit." He pulled out a third document, this one marked with a classified stamp. "And it's not just about money. It's about national security. It's about what happened when you visited Taiwan against the advice of every military and diplomatic expert. A visit that escalated tensions with a nuclear power. A visit that just happened to align with your husband's stock positions in defense contractors and regional stability plays." The accusation hung in the air, heavy with implications. Pelosi's face was pale now, her hands trembling slightly. The cameras caught every detail, the faltering smile, the nervous glances from her staff. Kennedy's voice remained steady, his southern drawl carrying the weight of moral authority. "You knew what would happen, Madam Speaker. You had the briefings. You had the intelligence. And you positioned your portfolio to profit from the crisis you helped create." The room was on the edge of chaos now, but Kennedy remained calm, his focus unwavering. He closed the folder, resting his hands on it as if it were a sacred text. "I didn't come here to play politics," he said, looking directly into the cameras. "I came here because the people of Louisiana, the people of America, deserve better. They deserve leaders who serve them, not themselves. They deserve to know the truth about what's been happening in the halls of power." He turned back to Pelosi, his eyes steady, his voice low but piercing. "Madam Speaker, you spoke of sacrifice. Let me tell you what sacrifice really means. It's not making millions while families lose their savings. It's not using classified information to get rich while small businesses struggle. It's not risking global stability for a stock market windfall. Sacrifice is serving the people who sent you here, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something." He paused, letting the words settle. "That's what I learned in Louisiana. That's what I'm here to defend." The gavel struck again, but the room was already shifting. The murmurs grew louder, the cameras flashed, and the weight of Kennedy's words settled over the audience like a storm about to break. Nancy Pelosi's dynasty, built over 40 years, was crumbling before the nation's eyes. And John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, had just begun to fight. The room hung in suspended animation. Every eye locked on Senator John Kennedy as he methodically arranged the documents on the witness table, each page a dagger aimed at the heart of Nancy Pelosi's legacy. His southern drawl cut through the tension like a calm breeze, before a storm steady and unyielding as he delved deeper into the web of deception. "Now, Madam Speaker, let's examine this pattern more closely," Kennedy said, his voice carrying the weight of irrefutable truth, pulling out a stack of financial records that detailed trades executed with uncanny precision. The first exhibit was a trading confirmation for NVIDIA stock purchased by Pelosi's husband just weeks before classified briefings on semiconductor vulnerabilities reached her desk. "Here's the timeline," Kennedy continued, holding up the document for the cameras, his finger tracing the dates like a prosecutor outlining a crime scene. "Your family invests millions right before you push the CHIPS Act through committee, an act that funnels billions in taxpayer dollars to the very industry boosting that stock. Coincidence? The stock jumps 40%, netting your household $4 million in profits. But that's not service to the American people. That's serving your own wallet." Pelosi's face drained of color, her predatory smile now a ghost of its former self, as murmurs rippled through the gallery, the Democratic chuckles silenced by the cold, hard numbers staring back at them. Kennedy didn't pause his rhythm, deliberate building like a crescendo in a courtroom drama, flipping to the next set of papers on Visa transactions. "And it doesn't stop there." He pressed on his eyes, narrowing slightly, the faintest edge of indignation creeping into his polite tone. "Your husband sells off Visa shares valued at $500,000 precisely before the Justice Department drops a monopoly lawsuit on the company. The stock dips 5.5%, right after losses avoided $27,000 saved. Statistical analysis puts the chance of this being random at less than 0.01%. Mathematically impossible without insider knowledge. The kind you get from those closed-door briefings." The room grew heavier, the air thick with the scent of scandal as Kennedy laid out the math, simple yet devastating like, explaining why 2 plus 2 can't equal 5. He pulled out a chart graphs spiking in damning correlation between congressional actions and stock movements, emphasizing how these weren't isolated incidents, but a symphony of self-enrichment. Pelosi shifted uncomfortably, her hands clasping and unclasping, a telltale sign of the armor cracking under the barrage of facts. "But wait, folks," Kennedy said, injecting a touch of his trademark folksy wisdom. "There's more to this story than just dollars and cents. Let's talk Alphabet, Google's parent. Your husband dumps nearly $5 million in shares a month before another DOJ antitrust hammer falls. Stock drops 6% overnight. Again, perfect timing. Again, millions shielded from loss. This isn't investing. This is insider trading dressed up in congressional privilege." The contrast was palpable. Kennedy, the embodiment of straightforward integrity, versus Pelosi, the architect of a shadowed empire, her staff now whispering urgently behind her, phones buzzing with incoming alerts from the outside world, where the hearing was already exploding across social media. He transitioned seamlessly to the Tempest AI deal, his voice dropping an octave for emphasis, pulling out classified stamped memos that tied healthcare AI initiatives directly to her Intelligence Committee access. January investment in Tempest AI, call options $1 to $2.5 million. Kennedy recited his drawl, making the figures sound almost absurd in their greed. Then comes the $200 million partnership announcement with AstraZeneca stock, doubles your profit, $3 million. How classified briefings on administration health AI pushes mentioning those exact negotiations. This isn't just about getting rich, it's about compromising national security for a quick buck. The accusations landed like artillery, each one backed by forensic detail, Kennedy's legal background shining through as he dissected the trades with surgical precision, no emotion wasted, just facts piling up like evidence in a trial. To drive the point home, he reached for a small digital recorder, holding it aloft, so every lens could capture its innocuous form, a device pregnant with doom. "But don't take my word for it," he said, his tone almost conversational, as if chatting over coffee in a Louisiana diner. "Let's hear it straight from the source." He pressed play, and Pelosi's voice filled the room crystal clear, discussing classified intelligence on Chinese tech threats and Taiwan tensions with her husband's advisor. "Paul, the semiconductor situation is heating up. Adjust our positions before the vote," her recorded words echoed, followed by specifics on military exercises and defense plays. The silence that followed was deafening. A vacuum sucking the air from the chamber, Pelosi's hands now visibly shaking, her eyes wide, with the realization that her own words were her undoing. Kennedy switched off the recorder with a click that reverberated like a gavel's final strike. "That was you, Madam Speaker, 3 days before the NVIDIA buy." Classified info turned into stock tips. "And that Taiwan visit, against every advisor's warning, escalating nuclear risks, all while your portfolio was primed to profit from the fallout in defense stocks and shipping reroutes." He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers, the room fading around them. "This isn't leadership. It's betrayal. While American families lost trillions in savings during market crashes, you made $47 million in trading profits that year alone. Small businesses shuttered $2.2 million gone, while you turned briefings into billions. Military families battled inflation at 9.1%, but your net worth ballooned from $3 million when you entered Congress to over $400 million today. That's a 1,433% return, beating Warren Buffett by a country mile. Either you're a financial wizard, or you've been cheating the system with info the rest of us don't get. Kennedy's words wove logic and outrage into a tapestry of condemnation, Highlighting the human cost, entrepreneurs like Michael Thompson in Austin denied contracts because the game was rigged for the connected. Janet Chen in San Francisco, her life savings wiped out while Pelosi cashed in. The senator's voice remained controlled, but the passion for justice simmered beneath a reminder that corruption wasn't abstract. It hurt real people, eroded faith in democracy, threatened the nation's security. As he stacked the documents neatly, the room teetered on eruption reporters scribbling madly. The chairman's gavel, hovering. Pelosi slumped in her chair, the once unassailable Queen of Washington, reduced to a figure of exposed frailty. Kennedy had laid bare the machinery of greed, and the fallout was just beginning to cascade. The hearing room, once a bastion of measured debate and procedural decorum, descended into utter pandemonium. The moment Senator John Kennedy concluded his devastating litany of evidence, his final words lingering like the echo of a cannon shot in a confined space. Pelosi collapsing backward into her ornate chair, as if the weight of 4 decades of accumulated secrets had finally crushed her indomitable spirit. Her face turning a ghostly pale, lips parted in shock, but no words emerging. Her hands clutching the armrests with knuckles whitening under the strain. While her loyal staffers, those ever-present shadows of political machinery, surged forward in a frantic huddle, murmuring urgent consultations, offering water, fanning her with documents that now seemed utterly irrelevant in the face of the catastrophe unfolding before them. The chairman, a veteran of countless hearings, both mundane and momentous, pounded his gavel with increasing vigor, the sharp cracks resounding through the chamber like desperate pleas for order, his voice rising above the growing din to demand silence. But it was futile. The room had ignited spectators whispering feverishly, journalists scrambling over one another to capture the raw emotion on film flashes popping in rapid succession, illuminating Pelosi's downfall in stark, unforgiving light. Her once predatory smile now a mask of disbelief and defeat, eyes darting wildly as if seeking an escape from the inescapable truth that had been thrust upon her. Kennedy, in stark contrast, remained seated at the witness table with the composure of a man who had simply done his duty. His expression serene, almost contemplative. The manila folder now closed, but its revelations indelibly etched into the collective consciousness of everyone present. A symbol of unyielding integrity in a town too often defined by compromise and corruption. His southern drawl having delivered not just facts, but a moral reckoning that transcended party lines and personal ambitions. As the chaos in the room simmered just enough for the proceedings to adjourn in disarray, the shock waves radiated outward with lightning speed, spilling into the digital realm, where social media platforms became the new battleground. Clips of Kennedy's testimony, proliferating like a viral contagion, shared and reshared millions of times within the first hour. Hashtags such as Kennedy exposes truth and Pelosi downfall surging to the top of trending lists, not just in America, but across the globe. Users from every demographic pouring out their reactions in a torrent of posts, memes, and videos that captured the raw outrage and vindication felt by a populace long suspicious of the elite's machinations. Ordinary citizens, from truck drivers in the heartland to tech workers in Silicon Valley, paused their daily routines to watch the footage on their phones, their comments flooding in. Finally, someone calls it out. And Kennedy is a hero for the people, the sentiment building into a digital roar that no amount of PR spin could muffle. News networks, sensing the historic gravity, abandoned their regular schedules in unison, anchors from CNN to Fox News to MSNBC, interrupting broadcasts mid-segment to go live with the unfolding drama. Their panels of experts dissect every trade, every recording, every accusation with a mix of astonishment and analysis. The BBC cutting away from its own domestic coverage to beam the story to international audiences, framing it as a pivotal moment in American democracy. A cleansing fire that might purge the system of its entrenched ills. The congressional switchboard, that venerable nerve center of public interaction with lawmakers, buckled under the unprecedented onslaught, lines jamming and systems crashing as calls poured in from coast to coast. Constituents demanding investigations, resignations, reforms, their voices. A chorus of betrayal and resolve from elderly retirees who had lost savings in market dips to young professionals burdened by student debt, all united in their insistence that enough was enough, that the era of politicians profiting from the public's trust must end. Federal agencies, typically slow-moving behemoths, sprang into uncharacteristic action. The FBI releasing a carefully worded statement within the hour confirming they were examining the presented materials for possible breaches of federal statutes. The Securities and Exchange Commission vowing a thorough review of all congressional family trades, and even the Department of Justice hinting at broader probes into the misuse of sensitive information, each announcement fueling the fire, signaling that this was no mere political spat, but a genuine threat to the status quo. Yet the true depth of the impact revealed itself not in the corridors of power or the echo chambers of media, but in the intimate stories of everyday Americans whose lives had been quietly devastated by the very system Kennedy had illuminated, narratives that now bubbled to the surface like long-suppressed truths. Consider Michael Thompson, the resilient entrepreneur from Austin, Texas, a former serviceman who had bootstrapped his small semiconductor supply company from a garage workshop into a modest enterprise only to face repeated rejections on government contracts, despite superior bids and veteran preferences. Contracts that invariably went to larger firms with shadowy ties to congressional insiders, ties that now, in light of Kennedy's revelations, appeared as clear threads in a web of favoritism and self-dealing. Costing Thompson not just revenue, but the expansion that could have created jobs for his community. Leaving him to ponder late nights how the game was rigged from the top. A realization that brought both anger and a strange relief, knowing he wasn't alone in his struggle. Then there's Janet Chen, the dedicated software engineer in her cramped San Francisco apartment, who had scrimped and saved every penny from her demanding job to amass $50,000 for a down payment on a home. A dream shattered when market volatility, exacerbated by policies pushed through with insider knowledge, wiped out her nest egg, forcing her to start over while watching figures like Pelosi amass fortunes. Chen, now standing outside Pelosi's local office with a handmade sign that read, "You traded secrets, we lost dreams," joined by hundreds of others in a vigil that was less about rage and more about reclaiming dignity, their presence a quiet testament to the human toll of corruption. Across the nation, similar vignettes unfolded in New Orleans. A single mother named Maria Rodriguez gathered with her neighbors, military families, who had endured deployments and sacrifices, sharing stories around kitchen tables of how inflation had eroded their budgets while politicians traded on intelligence meant for national defense. Rodriguez herself posting a video that went viral, addressing her fellow veterans with words of solidarity. Kennedy showed us what real courage looks like, standing up for the little guy against the big shots. Her message resonating with millions who had served or supported those who did, turning personal pain into collective action. Farmers in the Midwest, squeezed by subsidies skewed toward agribusiness giants with political connections, found their voices amplified on social platforms. One Iowa corn grower tweeting a thread that detailed how Pelosi's trades had indirectly influenced commodity markets, costing his family farm thousands in lost income, his story picked up by local news and snowballing into national discourse. Even in the bustling streets of New York, Wall Street analysts and average investors alike debated the implications with one young trader, anonymously confessing in an online forum how the revelations had shaken his faith in fair markets, prompting calls for systemic overhaul. Kennedy, thrust into the spotlight not by ambition, but by circumstance, emerged as an unlikely icon. His plain-spoken style and unwavering principles celebrated across the spectrum, conservatives lauding his conservatism rooted in accountability, liberals acknowledging his cross-aisle appeal in the fight against cronyism, late-night hosts crafting monologues around his quips, editorial boards penning op-eds hailing him as the conscience of the Senate, a man who reminded America that public service should be about the public, not private gain. Protests, peaceful and purposeful, sprouted in cities large and small, crowds chanting for transparency, waving signs that echoed Kennedy's words. Service over self, turning what could have been division into unity, a shared demand for a government that works for all, not just the well-connected. As evening fell over Washington, the ripple effects continued. Unabated Democratic leaders convening in hushed conference calls, their public statements notably absent of staunch defenses for Pelosi, instead emphasizing the need for thorough probes and ethical standards, a tacit admission that the evidence was too damning to dismiss. Republicans, rather than gloating, seized the opportunity for statesmanship, proposing bipartisan bills to ban insider trading by officials, recognizing that the moment transcended partisanship, offering a path to restore eroded trust. Internationally, allies expressed measured concerns about intelligence, sharing financial markets dipped in early trading as confidence waned. But beneath the uncertainty lay a budding optimism, a belief that this exposure could herald a new era, one where integrity like Kennedy's becomes the norm, where the people's will prevails over personal profit, proving that in the face of corruption, truth and resolve can indeed unleash profound change, awakening a nation to its better angels and setting the stage for lasting reform. In the weeks and months that followed, the explosive hearing, the political landscape of Washington underwent a profound transformation. Nancy Pelosi's once unassailable career crumbling under the weight of irrefutable evidence, leading to her abrupt resignation from Congress. A terse announcement, delivered in a brief letter, that avoided any admission of wrongdoing or apology, simply stating her intent to step down immediately and spend time with family, marking the end of a 4-decade reign that had defined Democratic power but now stood exposed as a monument to self-enrichment at the expense of public trust. The House Ethics Committee, spurred into action by the overwhelming documentation provided by Senator John Kennedy, released a comprehensive report condemning her actions as violations of federal laws on insider trading, misuse of classified information, and abuse of office. A bipartisan consensus that transcended party lines and signaled a rare moment of unity in a divided Capitol. The findings, authenticated by independent experts who verified every trade, every timeline, every recorded conversation, leaving no room for doubt or deflection. Swiftly, Congress moved to enshrine reforms, passing the Kennedy Act, officially the Congressional Trading Transparency and Prohibition Act, with overwhelming support. A law that banned members of Congress, their staff, and immediate families from owning or trading individual stocks while in office, mandating divestment or blind trusts within 90 days, with violations punishable by expulsion and criminal charges polling showing near-universal public approval at 89%, forcing even reluctant lawmakers to vote in favor, lest they face electoral backlash from a newly vigilant electorate. Intelligence agencies implemented stringent new protocols for handling sensitive information, requiring recorded briefings and real-time financial disclosures, closing the loopholes that had allowed corruption to flourish unchecked for so long. Senator Kennedy, the unassuming architect of this seismic shift, emerged not as a conqueror seeking glory, but as a beacon of principled leadership. His folksy wisdom and unflinching integrity celebrated in media profiles and public accolades. Time magazine featuring him on its cover as the voice of accountability. An article chronicling how his testimony ignited a nationwide movement for ethical governance candidates across the political spectrum, adopting platforms centered on transparency and service voters demanding rigorous financial disclosures and rejecting those with conflicts of interest. A cultural sea change where the Kennedy Standard became synonymous with putting country before personal gain. Schools incorporated the hearing into civics curricula, teaching students about moral courage through case studies of Kennedy's confrontation, inspiring a new generation to view public service as a noble calling rather than a lucrative opportunity. Children writing letters of admiration that flooded his office. One young girl from Louisiana penning, "You showed me that being honest can change the world." A sentiment echoed in classrooms nationwide. Military academies used Kennedy's example in ethics training to show how one person's resolve can defend democratic institutions from greed and self-interest. His true legacy was the lesson that corruption erodes trust, breeds cynicism, and weakens the system meant to serve the people. Kennedy proved that truth and courage can dismantle entrenched power, inspire citizens to demand integrity from leaders, vote with principle, and speak out against wrongdoing, building a society where justice, fairness, and opportunity are for all. His story is a timeless call for service, honesty, and responsibility, showing that when corruption meets unwavering principle, democracy thrives.